You just admitted to your mother that you were violated. And in that process, because my mum was mentally ill, nobody believed me. My voice was silent. So here is the big silence for me.
Wow.
Nobody believed me. Had many facets of my childhood and my life been brought out of the silence and given a voice to, my life and my trauma and my healing would have been exponentially deeper and faster. Probably still would have had to go through it, but not to the intensity that I am now.
The big silence. Empowering personal experiences, inspiring compassion, and healing lives. We are no longer silent. We are here.
The big silence. The big silence.
Well, finally, welcome Ginni Saraswati to the Big Silence podcast. Such an honor to have you here and continue our conversation from the Ginni Show that we had, months ago?
It feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only months ago. And, I'm really excited to be on this show because I love the guests and the content that you cover. So curious to see where we go today.
I know. Well, number one, I'm going to put our interview in the show notes because I think it's a really great conversation that I revisited this week. And we talk about on that podcast, like why you love podcasting. It's like you get to meet so many people that you normally maybe wouldn't connect with throughout the world. And it came up in our conversation, how we have such similar backgrounds and how we grew up. And I honestly have never really met anyone and had a one-on-one conversation with someone who understands the process of, or just growing up with a mentally ill parent. And we also lost our mothers the same year in 2021.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that. But you are a superstar founder of Ginni Media in New York City. I want to talk about Ginni Now.
Right. So Ginni Now. God, Ginni Now is going through quite I don't want to use the word transformation because it sounds both inappropriate to the evolution and also kind of quote unquote wanky in a way.
Yep.
Doesn't really do it justice. But Ginni Now, in New York City, as you said, I'm living with my beautiful wife. I got married in September last year.
Oh yeah, you were not married yet. When we were talking, you said you were about to get married. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Congrats.
so we got married, and I mean, I don't know if you went through this too, Karena, but I think marriage or any big event that has a lot of emotional and just stress and energy behind it, it does bring up things that you miss. Like you miss the absence of things and you miss the absence of people. So that was something that I went through in the wedding process. But right now I'm just in New York City, managing a couple of businesses. Ginni Media is one. The other is a studio I own in the city. And, really just landing into 2025. It's taken me a minute longer than usual, but I'm just landing here.
I know, that's so interesting. I think everyone is like 2025, yeah, and everyone's having a little difficulty landing into 2025. There's just a lot of energy and changes and things. And, I'm originally not originally, but lived in LA for 20 years. So there's a lot going on out there as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, fires, power changes, just everything is just, the energy is very thick at the moment.
Yeah. So I want to talk about you as a businesswoman first. So you have Ginni Media and then Metro Podcast Studio you just opened?
That is correct. Yeah. We opened it actually before the pandemic, before 2020, Karena. But obviously when 2020 happened, we had to close it and we kind of just revamped it and reopened it last year. So again, another process when you're building a physical business from an online business. So it's kind of taken me back to the founder roots where you have to kind of roll your sleeves up and nail things to the wall. So I've quite enjoyed that process. So yeah, 2 businesses that I'm running at the moment.
Well, congrats. So I want to dive deep in this conversation in particular because in my community with the Big Silence, I get a lot of stories in my DMs of thank you for sharing your story because that makes me feel not alone. And you sharing your story and having the success that you have and success in your own words and what that is for you, and being able to, I would even imagine, being married now and being able to love again and trust again and all of the dynamics and levels that go into what you have to learn and unlearn by being raised or not raised by a mentally ill parent. So let's go way back when Ginni was a little girl. How was that like?
It was challenging. It's interesting, Karina, because over the last 5 years, especially, it was a process of when my mother was she had Alzheimer's and she was
Mm,
declining to when she passed, to the grief around that. But Ginny, as a little girl, I was of the belief that, hey, my mother is amazing because you're a
mhm.
kid. She was an amazing cook. And being from a Sri Lankan culture, she was always the one to, if she knew what you liked, like she'd remember if you told her, hey, I love this, she would cook that for you and make sure that was there for you the next time you visited because she was that thoughtful. So it was perplexing and confusing for me because here was this woman who was so thoughtful and accommodating and giving and generous. And on the other side, there were things that didn't make sense. Like she'd do irrational things like play music till 3 o'clock in the morning and didn't really care that we were living in a little tiny unit building and everybody was hearing. And she'd let me stay up till 3 a.m. And
Mhm.
even I thought it was fun and that's what kids did, right? So you don't know any different. Then I went through some pretty hard times with my parents getting divorced. And then I went through sexual abuse as well from a family member. And the sad thing was when I told my mother that that had happened to me, she had one of her breakdowns. So literally the next day she was hospitalized.
Oh, wow.
So the police actually were going to take me to the police station to give my statement. But on the way, they took my mother dropped her off at the hospital essentially. And I had to go live with my aunt. So it was a really traumatic time for me. And a lot of things happened to, you just admitted to your mother that you were violated. She had a mental breakdown. She was hospitalized. I had to live with my aunt and uncle. I had to then go through this harrowing court case
Oh.
with my perpetrator or my predator who got not guilty in the end.
Mm.
And in that process, because my mum was mentally ill, nobody believed me. My voice was silenced. So here is the big silence for me.
Ooh, wow.
Nobody believed me. They thought my mum, because she was mentally ill,
Mhm.
had taught me to say that about this man.
Okay. Wow. I had known about your sexual abuse but that is so interesting. So, number 1, was your mom diagnosed before the abuse? So it was
She
already
was
known. Okay, so she already had
very much.
episodes before. So then this happened to you. And then the event possibly triggered your mom to have another episode?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. I remember her that day. She was manic. Like
Yeah.
she just wanted to get out and do something. And I mean, I think for even a mother with no mental illness, that would be heartbreaking to hear that you had failed to protect your child that you love
That
so
is
much.
very heavy, and that's the stigma, and
Yeah.
but you as a kid then, and you had a predator
Yep.
and went through the court process, and they were presumed innocent, and your mother because of your mother's illness, like, how do you even process that, and how old were you?
So when I was abused, I was 8.
8,
I
okay.
was 8 to 9 when it happened. It was a very intense timeline between the ages of 4 to 12. So my parents got divorced, we moved out, my mum remarried, we moved out again. I was sexually abused, a court case. It was just a big blur. A lot happened. But I didn't begin to process that till probably a couple of years ago, Karina. I went through EMDR therapy and
Mm,
my therapist
mhm.
really zoomed in on those moments. And those moments I believed in the last 30 years of my life. I'm like, I'm good. I've forgiven who I've needed to forgiven. I've moved on from whatever I've needed to move on. I haven't. So much makes sense to me about how I think about things, how permissive I am to certain things, and how, like, just the trauma that I experienced, I didn't process it as deeply as I thought. And I'm still processing it now.
Well, I always say, like, you're gonna process trauma the rest of your life, but just realizing,
Yeah,
like, there is that trauma there, and that's
exactly.
okay, but learning about it and EMDR is an amazing modality in therapy that will help you, get rid of that or help not get rid, it's always there, but,
Yeah.
start to heal from that trauma. So as a young kid, was your dad in your life once your parents divorced?
Not really.
Yeah.
So my dad was rather absent,
Mhm.
and there's cultural things there too,
Yeah.
right? As a Sri Lankan family, like the mother is the main caretaker or the primary parent. So he was quite absent, and he was absent during the process of me being violated and post that as well during the court case. So I did not feel any kind of protection from him, and that in it of itself has been something to process. And one of the things I realized during that trauma, Karina, which I'm still going through now, as you said, I'll probably work through this for the rest of my life. The perpetrator was the last person I had to forgive.
Mm.
There were so many parental figures, adult figures in my life that I'm still forgiving, or I'm still processing exactly what they did.
Wow. And okay, so we're going to get to that and the parents and that healing. But so then you're 8 and 9 years old and you start growing. Mom has bipolar and manic depression.
Yeah.
You as a teenager, especially in your culture, was it very talked about? Was it quiet? Was there a stigma? Was it pushed to the side? And then how did you manage that if no one wanted to talk about it as a teenager?
Nobody did want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I remember my sister and I were trying to talk about it with each other. My sister's 11 years older than me, so her experience was slightly more, I guess she'd seen different facets of my mum. I've gone through my trauma, seen my mum behave in a different way, but I was still seeing her as my primary protector, so to speak, or my primary parent. The thing that wasn't talked about was just her illness and the symptoms, because here you have, when my sister was a minor at the time, or when I was living with my mum, and I'm not putting blame on anyone, this is just exactly what happened, but the physicians who cared for her, any kind of family members like her siblings or anybody, there was no explanation to the kids that this is what your mother's going through and this is kind of what could happen. So when you have like you have me and my mum living alone together, is the kid responsible for making sure the mother has all the medication? That's a lot to put on a child. I remember the medication they were giving her, Stalacin, Epil, and Lipi. I could barely spell those things, yet alone remember the dosage that my mother took. And I felt that some of those things, it wasn't talked about, but you just kind of didn't know what to do. I kind of felt this huge weight on my shoulders that I needed to look after my mum from the age of 9, even through my teens.
Yeah.
So it's a lot.
So you just immediately became the parent. You didn't rebel. Like I went rebellion route.
Yeah, right.
You just had to survive and become your mother's parent right away.
Yeah. You had to survive and also I think deep down, even though I didn't, I guess, translate this in my mind, I knew I couldn't trust the adults assigned to take care of me to take care of me.
Yeah.
Because that's what I was shown. So I felt that I was in survival mode as a kid. Like, this is what I need to do to live, to live a safe life or protect myself to the best of my ability. Emotionally, there were things that I was still going through with my trauma, but like in the physical sense, okay, go feed yourself. Okay, go do this. They were just survival things. Yeah.
Wow. That's wild. So, okay. So you're a teenager. Where are you living at this point? Are you in?
So I'm living with my mum in Clayton, Australia.
Australia. Okay.
Yeah. So we're living in Australia at the moment, at the time. So that's what and my mum in my high school year decided, hey, I want to get married. I'm like, okay, mum, that's great. And then she's like, oh, I want to get married to my first boyfriend in Sri Lanka. And I'm like, okay, this is not, it's just these things that she would do.
Yeah.
And I remember my inner child just clinching, like, as a kid, how do you control that? Because she's going to do what she wants, which she did in the past. And then you're expected to love and accept her decisions. And yeah, it was almost like I was on this roller coaster and I was just clinging on until I could get off it. That's how it felt. The up and down of what's she going to do next? What's she going to do now? That's kind of how it felt in my senior year.
Right. So you're always in fight or flight and anxiety. Yeah. And did you just develop like anxiety or any coping thing? Like how did you just didn't take care of yourself?
No, self-care was something I learned probably like intensely over the last 5-6 years. I did not know how to take care of myself. I was surviving, right? And you don't think about, okay, make sure that you get up, that you do this, that you exercise, that you eat certain foods. I was just surviving. And anxiety, I didn't become acquainted with or acknowledge until the last 7, 8 years, and everything just made sense. I should have been in therapy as a kid. I felt, given the trauma that I went through, given what my mum was experiencing, therapy was very much needed for someone like me. And if I could parent myself now to little Ginny, I would be, honey, you're going to therapy, and then we're going to make sure that you're okay and you can have strategies to cope with what you do, what you feel, and that you can have a space that's safe and that you can process it. But again, when you have a caretaker who doesn't believe in therapy herself or is not able to take care of you, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And that is something that we have to learn.
Let's talk about inner child. So now that you have these modalities and therapy and everything that you've learned, have you done the inner child work and tried to heal little Ginny?
Absolutely. I'm still trying to heal little Ginny. I'm still working with little Ginny to trust, not to always take the driver's seat on everything. Parenting little Ginny has both been such a eye-opener and also such an empowering thing for me to learn, because now I'm an adult, right? I can tell little Ginny, hey, I've got you. I can protect you. I've got the wheel. You don't need to take the wheel here. And I can just feel certain relief from my inner child, like, oh, I can chill. And it's so strange, Karena, that you've asked me this question, because I was saying to my wife, there was a couple of years ago where when my podcast came out, there was a billboard in Times Square. Now, you look at me, you may think, if you don't know me, oh, she's very out there, she's outgoing. As soon as that billboard was up, I'm like, I didn't know how to be. I was freaking out. I'm like, this is so public. I don't want to be myself. The public can only get this part of me. They can't get anything else. So I was kind of fragmenting or compartmentalizing who I was. But it was because of my inner child, little Ginny. She was like, the last time I was fully visible, it was not safe for me. So I've had to learn and parent her in a way like, it's safe to come out now and be you because I've got you. So that's been a rewarding process.
That's so interesting too, because I, for so long, even with Tone It Up, didn't want to share my story because I was so used to pushing stuff under the rug, staying silent. Don't let your friends or other people know about your family's history, about what went on. And so when you become so public, then it's like it kind of freaks you out. But then, as you know, when you start talking about it, it frees you up. And
that's it freaks you out, then it frees you up. It could be a poster, Karena.
I like that. Freaks you. Okay. Okay. So last time, as you know, I have my memoir, and last time we talked, you said you had started writing a book. And where are you at now with that?
So I've had this book written for a while. It's a manuscript. It's been done. But I feel that it was done 2019. It was completed. And I feel that because so much has changed for me over the last 6 years, I feel that I need to revisit it. So thank you for bringing that up, because that was a goal that I've had for so long to get it published. I think this is something I'm going to revisit probably this year, just to get in there and unpack the weeds of what I've been going. And also now as the parent to little Ginny, I think I'll have some, wisdom and after going through EMDR, there are more things that I remember that can be put into the book as well that are more of value to anybody who's gone through trauma or had been parented by someone with a mental illness. A space to actually talk about it and a space to really share, hey, this is the long-term effects and results of going through this and not talking about it. Because that's the thing. And I love the title of your podcast, The Big Silence. Had many facets of my childhood and my life been brought out of the silence and given a voice to, my life and my trauma and my healing would have been exponentially deeper and faster. Probably still would have had to go through it, and still going through it, but not to the intensity that I am now.
Well, I ask that because writing and putting it all out there, it's kind of just for you, but also for others. So I encourage you to do it. And it's the scariest thing ever. Like when my book was finally being published, I was like, oh, should I have done that? And then it's like this whole, like, you take a deep breath and you're like, oh, it's out there. I'm not hiding anything anymore. Nothing's a secret. It's out there. So
did you have like a vulnerability hangover when you shared everything? You're like, oh no.
I'm like, did I overshare?
No.
But
exactly.
Oh, well, just me, overshare. So, okay, how do you end up in New York?
I think New York is the city that called me from a young age.
Yeah.
It's funny, since living here, everything about the city, I think New York's a place where people either really love it or hate it. There's no kind of, very rare that there's an in between. But I ended up here in 2011. I visited for the first time and I fell in love with the energy. And I just felt like this is a place where I can be me, I can be free, and I feel safe for for whatever reason to be creatively me. And I think little Ginny, if I look back at it, little Ginny loved the creative energy of this city and just the fact that this city embraces individuality in a way that I think no other place on earth that I've been to yet does. Um, but in 2017, I quit my day job because I was doing a side hustle of editing podcasts and producing my own. And a lot of my clients were in America, primarily New York. And at the time, I've always wanted to move. So I thought, I think now is the time to take that leap. So I've been here since and have been paying taxes and calling it home since.
Yay, we love that part. So, did you ever, growing up with a mentally ill mom, did you have a history that you knew about in your family of mental illness?
Not that it was talked about.
Yeah.
I do think it was there. Like,
Mhm.
I think about my grandmother's age. She had her first child when she was 14, 15, 16,
Mhm.
around there. It's blurry as to the exact age, but she had 10 children, 12 actually.
10, 12
Two were
children?
12 children, 2 were stillborns.
Okay.
And 10 of them, they like to parent 10 children. Imagine the love and attention that you get. It's not going, and I knew my mum was going through that. She was going through the trauma of not having the attention of her mum and dad because it was so dispersed, right?
Mhm.
There is mental illness there. I don't think it's talked about. And I think now I'm empowered enough to call out things that are culturally not um, fair, because I think mental illness, especially in the brown culture,
Mhm.
it's such a stigma because the brown culture is so focused on looking good to everybody else in a way that is so toxic that we care more about what people think than caring about each other.
Wow.
And that's what I'm working on reshaping for me.
Can you give some examples of what you grew up with and how you, when you learned that it was toxic?
Absolutely. I still now,
Yeah.
just like even the gender parodies,
Mhm.
right? Like men feeling like they can say what they want. I remember when my mum passed, there's this particular family member we have, I won't name him, but he has the audaciousness continually when something significant and something significantly sad that happens to say things because he feels that his opinion, which is what it is, needs to be heard. So he said to me at least 3 times, one when my mum passed, the day that we buried her, and about a couple of years before, he said, "It's a good thing your mother is going to die," or "It's a good thing that your mother's dead," or "I'm glad that your mother's dead." So
Wow. Okay.
it's just like exactly, right. And firstly, I'm not the audience for your opinion, bruh. Let's just start there. I'm not the audience. Have an opinion, I get it. Everybody has an opinion. But the truth is, somebody close to both of us died. And for you to share that opinion with me at this timing is quite poor. And you're being an asshole. Let's
Yeah.
just be
That-
frank of what it
yeah.
is. But I think like things like that, the permissiveness to do things like that, to say things like that, because his opinion counts more than anything else. Because he's repeatedly told me that, right? That's one example. But also like just financial decisions certain people make. It's like the keeping up with the Joneses thing. Like, let's buy and take out loans and buy all these lavish things just so we can make Bob, who we don't like down the road,
Mhm.
who's a family member, feel inferior to us. There's certain examples that I've seen going on, and I'm like, what is this madhouse? Like, why are we doing this? It makes no sense to me now.
Yeah. Wow. And so I'm going to ask, when you were getting married to a woman,
Mhm.
was
Yeah.
there judgment there in your culture?
I'm sure there was.
But you're like, just go, like,
Yeah,
not here for
again,
it.
I'm kind of like, I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was, but this is the thing. If there was, I won't hear about it. They'll
That's
say
great.
it behind my back.
Yeah.
And again, quite frankly, I really don't care because I'm living my life, my happiest life and my
That's
best
great.
life based on me and what works for me. And I really don't want to put my self-worth, my safety in people that don't really have that look out for that for me.
Well,
if that makes sense.
and
It was a very
that's
inarticulate way of saying that.
yeah, well, that's great because then you're breaking that generational trauma that carrying what people think about you.
Exactly.
You're ending that here.
And that's where I think the brown culture goes wrong.
Mhm.
It's so much about, oh, we got to look a certain way. We can't have a gay child. We
Mhm.
can't tell people she married a woman. We're just going to say, hey, she's. I remember like when I was, I was before my wife, I dated other people. And I remember family members saying, oh, she already has a boyfriend or she already has. It's like, no, or she doesn't want to get married anymore or something like that. I'm like, why dismiss that part? Again, it's this dismissiveness and
Mhm.
silencing and not giving a voice to the truth that exists there.
Did you, in falling in love and getting and being married, because of your mother and that relationship, did you ever have trouble learning to trust and love again and believe that you were worthy of love?
100%.
Yeah.
My mom's illness was one of the reasons.
Mhm.
The other part was learning to be protective of myself
Mhm.
in another way. I think with my mum, I was taught to accept the love that I was given, regardless of its flaws or dangers or benefits, for want of a better word. Like there was obviously a great side to my mum, which, I love and still loved and still love. It took me a while to trust other people, or especially intimate partners,
Mhm.
to really have my back.
All right. Well,
And it took me a minute. Even with my wife, I was working through a process of, and she's probably the first partner I've been with where I felt really protected. And I
Mhm.
think that reflection came because I was becoming more protective of myself.
Mhm.
But it's just the ability to completely trust, open up, but also trust that person to make good calls for you. It's uncomfortable because you're not used to it. And you have to go through certain things like, oh, I'm going through this. Is this really safe for me? Am I blindly trusting you? Again, it's a process that you have to go unlearning like what you've been taught to accept
Yeah.
to what actually really is great for you.
I think there's two sides to it too. And for people listening, there's you learning to love again, coming from that family dynamic and your youth. Um, and then also your partner, who was probably like, what, how can, like, not quite understanding how to understand what you went through.
Exactly. Exactly.
Unless they went through the same thing and it's trauma bonding or something, but I'm
Yeah.
imagining that she had to learn so much of you that was so deep and dark and healing and learn to love that about you, and then you had to trust her to truly love you and figure
Exactly.
yeah.
And I do feel that with her. I think like there's one thing where you hear about your partner's trauma and then you become protective and then dismissive and all those sorts of things. And there's another thing to hold that space for, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I'm going to have your back always. And I'm going to hold space for that messiness as you figure out your boundaries around that. That's a big container to hold, and
Yeah.
it's not a container that can be just created out of thin air. Like, that takes a very special person to do that. I'm very blessed in that way.
I know. Any tips? I mean, I could always give some with, I'll say with Bobby, he was like, what's mental illness? What's this? Like, mom's in
Yeah.
the picture all of a sudden. Um, any tips that you have? I know for us, Bobby was really great, where he wanted to go to NAMI classes to learn about mental illness and everything. And
Yeah.
we did that together. So that was very helpful in our marriage. Is there anything that you both have done to better understand each other?
I think for us, we're both in individual therapy. And I
Mm.
think, regardless of whether you have a history with mental illness or a parent with mental illness, I think, again, it's a great space and a container to really share and have things about you mirrored and to mirrored to you and to learn about yourself. The other great tool, and this sounds really kind of kumbaya, but reading books on
Mm.
self help or mental illness together and actually taking that time to talk about it, it's that is a step to bringing it into the forefront, right? Like actually talking about it, whether it be through a resource like a book, a resource like a podcast, you listen to something or you read something together and you talk about it. It's like, oh, because every conversation that you had, and you may speak to different people. I know you said I'm the only one who's gone through similar experiences this is to you with what we've gone through together, but there's always something that comes up that is shared by that person that you connect with. So these sort of conversations and these resources, the access that it gives, is a great spot to start talking. Another great thing too is love meditation. Just the centering, setting the intent, and just seeing what comes up during the day. And journaling, like you said, the writing part. There's all these resources I use, but journaling has been the best because whatever's in your mind just comes out. And then your mind is so amazing in the sense that it's like brain, what's in my mind, get it out, and then the wheels start turning without you even knowing it. So that's really, really helpful.
What's your favorite self-help book?
Oh, there's so many, Karena. Let me look at my bookshelf.
I know. There's like the old school ones that I keep and like I've read 3 times, but
Yep. There is one that I have, which my therapist actually sent me. I'm going to pull it up here. I always butcher the title, but this is the one that she gave to me when I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. But it's called, there's 2. It's called Complex PTSD From Surviving to Thriving. It's by Pete Walker.
Okay.
And my other favorite book is Buddhism for Busy People.
Okay. I'm taking notes right now.
That's a great book, especially for someone who has Buddhism for Busy People, especially for someone who hasn't really dipped their toe into self-help or meditation or anything in that self-help world. That book really gives you a kind of a start to finish, I guess, timeline of what the triggers are to notice when you're like, oh, my body's talking to me. When should I listen to it? And typically we listen to our bodies when we're at that point with our doctor who says, yo, your cholesterol's high. That's when we listen, when it's in danger, right? So that is a great book to really listen to what's actually really going on with our bodies, our inner childs, and our minds, really.
I love that. I haven't heard of either of those. I'm always, my go-tos are like, that really helped me when I was transitioning out of my decade of darkness that we talked about. Power of Now and A New Earth. I'm sure you've read both of them.
Love Eckhart Tolle.
Yes.
I love Gary Zukov too.
Yes, yes.
We actually produce his podcast, but his book, Seed of the Soul. Wow.
Oh, yes. I've got that
presence.
one too.
Yeah.
I got to see him speak in person at a Wanderlust festival a few years ago.
That would have been amazing. He's such a present man. He's probably the most present person I've ever been blessed to come into contact with because he's just so present, aware, and there. And it reminds you to really slow down. There's such beauty in the pause, right?
Yes, I love that. So for you, because I ask this because I had this fear because I did have, my grandfather had schizophrenia and died by suicide. My mother had schizophrenia and depression. And I lived in this place of fear. And that's why I believe I became so self-destructive as a teenager, that I would become like my mother. Did you ever have those feelings that this was going to happen to you? And
100%.
Yeah.
100. I had a fear that I would do the same thing. I would, if I were to have kids, that my kids would go through the same thing. Even, we don't have kids yet. My 2 cats, I feel like I'm extra protective with them because of, like, you can't do that. It's too much sometimes.
Yeah.
But I do feel that there was a thought in the back of my mind. It wasn't just about my mum's mental illness. I'm like, I've gone through some pretty heavy stuff. My mum has mental illness. There's a lot with this culture that there's wrong with that I have grown up around. I had that fear at the back of my mind. And I think you went through your decade of darkness. I guess I did too, to some extent, but I didn't, because I'm so being raised in that brown culture. On the surface, I'm high functioning, I'm good. But underneath, there's all this stuff going. Mine translated to, food addiction, mindless actions, trusting people emotionally that I probably should not have trusted. But it got to a point where you're learning through these things and you're navigating through these things and you're like, oh, okay, I've got to, again, reparent and get back to it. I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered your question there, Karena. What was the question?
The fear of having a mental illness yourself.
Yeah, that was the first thing. So all of that fear, when I moved to New York away from that environment of my family, when I started therapy, that was the first reason I started therapy. I'm like, I need to really address what's happened and to see if there's more there, because I'm seeing these patterns of relationship showed up. So that was the first step to, I guess, a reaction or a liberation from my fear. And that's why I'm in continual therapy, and I'll continually work on myself, read self-help books to ensure that I am mentally in the best place that I can be. And if depression or mental illness shows up, I have the resources to actually talk through them or work through it.
Yeah, that's great. And not holding a stigma against yourself, but
No.
having those tools. That's great.
Yeah. I think a part of me, when I started to fear the mental illness, that I'm like, oh man, it's hereditary. I'll get it. It's genetic. I think for me, that was my stigma coming up, which is ironic because I'd grown up with that stigma, right? So I'm like, oh, it's a bad thing. I shouldn't have this.
Yeah.
But you work through that and you're like, no, if it happens, let's have a container for it. Let's have a space for it.
Well, yeah, because for myself, I think I sat in this victimhood for so long of my life is going to turn out like my mother's, homeless, sick, nothing. So I didn't try to achieve anything. I said, in my mind, I was like, why would I try to live my best life? Why would I try to do anything healthy for myself? Why? Just why? I'm just going to lose everything.
Yeah.
So I love this story. But then there's that moment that clicks in your head. I am not my mother. So for you, because now you've built a life, you've got a loving relationship, you've got a career, you're an entrepreneur. Like, what is the advice that you would give someone that's listening that feels like they're just going to be like their parent?
I think exactly what you said. You are not your parent. You are not your thoughts. You're the person observing them. And I do feel, for me, looking back, I wouldn't be the person I am today had it not been for the resources that I had. Therapy aside, I'm talking in my community. And it just takes one person. I think some people believe that you need this whole tribe. Your tribe could be just one person. That's all it takes. And it doesn't have to be a physical person. It could be a podcast. It could be a book. I do really think that having examples of people who've had, and this is why podcasts and sharing stories are so important. It gives perspective, it gives connection, it gives light onto things that you don't think or look at. But for me, that's what's really been my lifesaver. My community, resources, podcasts, just feeling like you belong to and that you're seen to and your experiences don't have to be silenced.
So let's talk about grief a bit. I know that was a big part, and there's many stages of grief. And as we both lost our mothers in 2021, and there's so many different levels of trauma with that and unpeeling those. So what was your process like, and how have you been working through it?
The first process for me, Karena, was because my mum had Alzheimer's, dementia and Alzheimer's for about 8 years. And in that 6 years I was in Australia, the last 2 I moved to America. I almost couldn't grieve the mother that I loved, was traumatized by, for let's just call it what it is, and that had gone through that stuff with, because I had to take care of her, right? Because she wasn't mentally able to, because her cognitive functions were declining. So that part of the perception of my mother was put on pause. When she was given end of life, that's when I started thinking about everything, like the good things. And I think that's what happens when someone dies. You tend to some extent martyr them, and you forget all the things that you've gone through that are traumatic or difficult. And that was really hard for me because it was during 2020 or 2021 when there's lockdowns all around the world, especially Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world. So flying into Australia, knowing that I had to do 14 days in a hotel, in my mind, waking up every day thinking, is she going to die? Is she going to be here? Am I going to see her? Okay, 1 more day in hotel quarantine. Okay, 2 more. It was just like, it was like emotional purgatory, really, being in that space. So when I finally got out of the hotel, I got to spend 11 days with her. And in that time that she was passing, I remember when she was conscious, she wasn't really responding, but when I went and saw her, and for the first time since for the first time in a couple of years, actually, she opened her eyes and she smiled. And she said, "Put there," which means child. in Sinhalese, which was so touching that moment. I'm like, okay, she knows I'm here on some level. So throughout those days that she was conscious, I told her things like, thank you for looking after me the best that you could. I'm sorry if I did anything to hurt you or anything like that. So it was kind of this closing of the chapter. And then I was there when she passed, when she took her last breath. And it was, it's quite a moment that it's peaceful, and it's also like, you never forget that, right? It's seared into your memory.
Yep.
I could just feel her spirit leave, and I just felt her. It was the most peaceful I've ever seen her. Like this woman who went through so much with her mental illness, and it's the most peaceful I've seen her. And, you know, the funeral process. And after that, it was only when that I got back to America that I wasn't surrounded by family or people telling me lovely stories about my mum that the grief process started. Because that's when I started to cry and to really think, oh shit, you are motherless now. You're parentless. You feel orphaned to some extent. And the other part of the grief is grieving through the things that I didn't get from my mother that I wanted to. Protection, sanity, you know, deep and clear and sound financial decisions, things that you had to go through as a kid. I had to grieve through that. And also it was difficult. That martyrdom that I held my mother in quickly dissipated, and it was really looking at the truth. So grief is one of those things, it takes so many emotions and layers and strength, but it's an ongoing process as well. Like even in therapy now, I'm like, oh yeah, mum did that. That was shitty.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
I know. I mean, preaching to the choir here. Such a
You felt the same too when your mother passed?
So many layers, and like it hits you in different ways. And then there's almost this like guilt to grieve.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this on the podcast before, but my grief therapist said that the second year is the hardest because you're kind of maintaining the first year and handling everything. And the second year is survivor's guilt, and you actually let yourself grieve. And grief, I would just say, anyone out there, grief is not linear. Let yourself take your time and grieve.
Yeah.
And all. Yeah.
It's also on the receiving end, grief is a hard thing to understand. That some people think, oh, this person's been grieving for a few years now. The stigmatized word, get over it, or the saying, get over it. It's not linear. It's going to show up when it shows up, and you have to, it's like the movie If. It's like your imaginary friend that you never invited. So when you're showing up for a meeting, grief is there. How do I hold space for grief and also show up for my team? That's been a thing that I've had to learn. So, yeah.
Yeah, because at that time, you running your businesses, dealing with that, what is the number one tip? I had to do the same thing, but what for you, like what was the number one lesson that you learned, or that you would have done differently, or maybe that you did do that you would share?
What I would have done differently is not try to, I think at the time I was reaching for connection in New York, and I didn't always find it in the healthiest of places for me or in the best choices for me. But I would say it's okay to grieve safely and soundly if you're grieving alone. If that's really what you need to do. Like I remember at the end of 2021, I got COVID around the holiday time. I'm like, I was looking forward to the holiday time. I'm like, yay, I get to go see my family, the family I call here in New York. But no, the universe had other plans for me. It's like, nope, you're getting sick, you're staying indoors, and you're really letting yourself arrive to what's actually happened. So that is my biggest tip. Let yourself arrive, however that may be, and let yourself show up however and whoever that may be that day. That is better than trying to suppress and compartmentalize, because it does eventually wave over you.
Yeah, that's good advice. So what inspired you to start the Ginni Show and Ginni Media?
The Ginni Show was, so I became a podcaster as a consequence of being a radio host in Australia. But I really loved what I was seeing with podcasting at the time, where other than FM stations kind of putting out their little snippets of interviews as podcasts on iTunes, I loved the niche communities that were starting. And I'm like, this is a really great way to kind of also like talk about things that I'm not allowed to or not supposed to talk about on radio, right? So the Ginni Show was great because I still am, I'm perpetually curious about humans and human nature and how people respond to things, and I still am. So I'm like, let's start the Ginni Show. I'll share my story, see if it connects. Ended up connecting. And I'm like, okay, this is a great connection point. So I continued that. And that's when Ginni Media was born out of the Ginni Show, really, because I had entrepreneurs, influencers, brands saying, hey, can you show me what you did there? Because I really love the authentic connection you made with your audience. So it was all out of consequences and all accidental. Karena, I did not intend on any of it to happen.
Well, I mean, it worked out, and you get to have a voice, and you're not silenced anymore, and you can say anything you want, and you get to meet a ton of amazing people. And then how many shows do you have on your network?
So we have about, at the moment, we have around 50, 55 on our, and that we produce for, I mean, anybody from like tech companies to beauty brands to entrepreneurs to like spiritual leaders like Gary Zukov, Jack Canfield. So we've got such an eclectic range of learnings to go through.
That's so cool. So where can people find like all of your podcasts for Ginni Media and then obviously your show?
So for Ginni Media, you can go to ginnimedia.com, and the Ginni Show, you can follow me at the Ginni Show on Instagram. We post all the trailers, the links to the podcast and everything on there. Our lovely trailer from our interviews on there. I think that's my most watched trailer, actually.
Really? That trailer was so good. I was, even my team was like, what? This is amazing.
No, it was like, what that episode really connected with a lot of people. And I think it just highlights just how important it is to talk about mental illness and everything in between.
Yeah. And and I'll link to our conversation together from the Ginni Show in the show notes here. Yeah. Thank you, Ginni. Always lovely to chat. And
thank you, Karena. This has been wonderful. And thank you for being such a wonderful hostess and carving out this space for me.
Back at you. Right, thanks.
Amazing. Take it easy. Thanks so much.
The big silence. The big silence.